The humans are here. Doomhammer glanced up from his reverie, annoyed at the fear he heard in Tharbek's voice. When had his fierce sub-chieftain become so weak? I know they are here, he growled in reply, standing and glancing behind the other orc. They were standing upon a rough ledge that had been carved from the mountaintop, in front of the fortress itself and high above the rocky plain. And from here he could see the remaining horde spread below. The last time he had had this vantage, his warriors had carpeted the plain below, leaving not a hint of the rock beneath. Now there were large patches of black rock between the green and brown, and he could pick out each family where it grouped together, slightly apart from the rest. When had his horde grown so thin, and what had he led them to? Why had he not listened to Durotan sooner and heeded his old friend's words? Something he had been warned about was coming true. What will we do? Tharbek demanded, stepping up behind him. We do not have the numbers to repel them. Not anymore. Doomhammer glared at his second so fiercely the other orc backed away. It was true that they were fewer now, and that their forces were no longer so numerous as to blanket the world. But they were still orcs, by the ancestors. What do we do? He hissed at his lieutenant, pulling his hammer from his place on his back. We fight, of course. Turning away from the quivering Tharbek, Doomhammer stepped farther onto the ledge. Hear me, my people, he bellowed, raising his hammer high. Some turned to look up, but others did not, and that incensed him. He struck the cliff face a mighty blow with his weapon, and the resounding crack brought him the horde's immediate and undivided attention. Hear me, he shouted again. I know that we have suffered defeats and setbacks, and our numbers are sorely diminished. I know that Gul'dan's treachery has cost us dearly, but we are still orcs, we are still the horde, and our footsteps shall shake this world. A cheer rose from the warriors below, but it was ragged and weak. The humans have followed us to this place, he continued, spitting each word as if it disgusted him, which it did. They think us beaten. They think we came here because we are fleeing their might, as a dog would flee its master. But they are wrong. He raised his hammer again. We came here because this is our stronghold, our place of strength. We came here because from here we can spill forth once more, covering this land with our steps. We came here so that we might pour out upon them again and make them once more tremble at our name. This time the cheer was louder, and Doomhammer let it wash over him. The warriors were standing and waving their weapons aloft, and he could tell they were getting worked up again. Good. We will not wait for them to come upon us, he told his people. We will not sit here idly and let them dictate this battle. No, we are orcs, we are the horde. We will bring the fight to them, and they will learn to regret ever pursuing us here. And when we have crushed them beneath us, we will march back over their corpses and once more claim their lands as our own. He held his hammer over him with both hands, swinging it about above his head, and the cheer now shook the rocks and the very stone upon which he stood. Doomhammer felt a smile crease his face, and exulted in it. These were his people. They would not go down sniveling and pleading. If it fell, it would be in battle, and with blood on their hands. Ready the warriors of our clan, he told stunned Tharbek. My elite guard and I will lead the charge ourselves. The rest of the horde will follow. Turning, Doomhammer glanced at the bulky figures that stood in the shadows waiting. Each of them straightened and nodded as he caught their gaze, and Doomhammer nodded in return. These were his elite guard, and they were all ogres. Doomhammer was a proper orc, and had been raised to hate the ogres, but these were different. They were more intelligent than most of their kind, for one, but they were warriors and not warlocks. Equally as important, they were intensely loyal to him and him alone. He knew they admired his strength and courage. They seemed to see him as a small ogre himself, and had pledged themselves to his personal command. He, in turn, had come to respect their strength and rely upon their support. He knew they would die for him if necessary, and was surprised to realize he would give his life for them as well. and now they would all risk their lives, as the Horde's victory hung in the balance. At least the portal was safe. Rend and maimed Blackhand had survived the battle with Gul'dan and an attack by the Alliance fleet, along with some of their clanmates. They had sent a scout to Doomhammer, finding him on his way here from Khaz Moden, and he had ordered them to join the rest of their clan at the portal. He still did not trust the brothers, but they had proven themselves loyal to the Horde, at least, and he needed strong warriors to protect their access to Draenor. Not that he would ever consider fleeing, even if the battle turned against them. He nodded at his ogres again. Then he made his way off the ledge, leading down toward the plain below, and the battle that awaited them. The Alliance was not prepared for the orcs to attack. Just as Doomhammer had hoped, the humans had positioned themselves for a siege, expecting to wait the orcs out and take out any lone warriors foolish enough to show themselves beyond the protective cliffs that ringed Blackrock Mountain itself. Doomhammer's charge took them completely by surprise. "Orcs," a soldier shouted, running back to where Lothar and his lieutenant stood. "They've overrun our position." "What?" Lothar kicked his steed into motion and galloped across the Black Valley, where he had stationed the bulk of the Alliance troops. Turalyon and the others followed close behind. Sure enough, as he approached the front lines, he heard the unmistakable sound of battle. Then he saw them. They were orcs, but orcs like he had never seen. These were massive creatures with thick arms and stout legs, and their hair was worn in spikes that rose above them like bird crests or horse manes. The orcs had no armor, wearing only loincloths, shoulder pads, and furry boots, and wielded their weapons with mad abandon, hacking and stabbing everything within their reach. Their green skin was heavily tattooed, and most of them had jagged bits of metal or small bits of what looked like bone shoved through ears, noses, brows, lips, and even nipples. They were savages, and the men were falling back before their frothing attack. "Uther," Lothar shouted, and the paladin strode forward. He lowered his sword, indicating the orcs, and that was enough. The paladin nodded, beckoning the other members of the Silver Hand to follow him as he lowered his helm and raised his warhammer. "By the holy light," Uther shouted, a glow springing up around him and his weapon. "We shall not suffer such beasts to live," and he dove into the fray, his hammer slamming down upon the nearest orc's head and shattering its skull. The sky here was always thick with clouds and soot, casting heavy shadows and blood-tinged light upon everything. But not now. The clouds parted and a beam of pure sunlight lanced down, limning Uther as he waded into the assembled horde. The paladin became a figure of pure light, awesome and terrifying, his every blow crushing orc warriors left and right. The other paladins joined him, his light suffusing them as well. The Silver Hand had expanded in the months since the war had begun, and now numbered 12 under Uther's command, and not counting Turalyon. Those 12 waded into the combat, their hammers and axes and swords glowing with their faith, and the rest of the Alliance soldiers pulled back to give them space. The orcs turned and faced their new foes. It was a brutal battle, savages versus zealots. Shining mail against tattoos and piercings. The orcs were strong, tough and crazed enough not to notice pain, but the paladins were filled with righteous anger and the power of their faith, and their holy auras caused more than one orc to turn away when attacking. With this advantage, the paladins ringed the savage orcs, cutting down one after another until the last lay dead at their feet. "Good work," Lothar was saying when another sentry ran up to him. What now, he wondered wearily. Another attack? "Another attack," the soldier gasped, echoing his thought. "This time to the west." "Damn them," Lothar muttered, spurring his horse again and racing toward the new location. They were smart, he had to give them that. He had not expected an attack, and his men were not ready for it. Most of them had relaxed, counting on a long, slow siege, and some had even removed their armor, though he had ordered them to stay alert just in case. Now they were paying the price for their laxity, and if the orcs were able to weaken enough spots along their line with these sudden attacks, they could break through and escape into the rest of the mountain range. It could take months, even years, to track all of them down, and that would give the horde enough time to rebuild and try again. He could not allow that to happen. He burst upon the new battle, trampling an orc that did not move aside quickly enough, and then wheeled his horse around and reined in, studying the situation. This was a much larger attack than the first one, a full 70 of them or more. Even more daunting were the 6 ogres in their midst. They fought savagely, but not as mindlessly as the last attackers, and showed some sense of tactics. Particularly the giant orc in their midst, whose long hair hung in ornamented braids that danced as he swung a massive black hammer left and right, crushing alliance soldiers with each blow. Something about the way the giant moved, quickly but carefully, even gracefully despite the massive black plate armor encasing him, struck Lothar. This he somehow knew was their leader. He was urging his horse into the fray when the giant glanced up and looked right at him. Those eyes were not the glowing red Lothar had grown accustomed to seeing in his foes. They were gray and full of intelligence, and they widened slightly as if in recognition. There, Doomhammer grinned as he studied the large human perched on the horse nearby. That one, with the shield and the enormous sword and the clever sea blue eyes, he was their leader. He was the one Doomhammer had been hoping to find. If he could take out this man, the army's resolve would crumble. "Move aside," Doomhammer bellowed, smashing a human soldier in his path and kicking one of his own orcs out of the way as well. The man he saw was charging into the fray as well, laying about him with that sword, barely looking at the carnage he was creating. The human leader's eyes were locked on him. Combat raged all around him, but Doomhammer kept his own gaze fixed on his foe. He stalked forward, his hammer clearing space through the crush of bodies, not caring if he struck orc or human. All that mattered was reaching that man. The human was only slightly more careful, not actively striking any of his own people, but expecting them to dodge his horse and his blows all the same. Finally, there were no more warriors between them, and Doomhammer faced the man at close range. Mounted, the human had the advantage. Doomhammer solved that problem at once. His hammer arced out, its massive stone head smashing full force into the horse's head. The steed collapsed, blood pouring from its shattered skull, its legs twitching. The human did not fall. Instead, he kicked free of his stirrups and leaped to one side as his horse fell, then hurtled the body to confront Doomhammer directly. Oh, thank you for the 17 biddies. Defiance, I appreciate that. The rest of the battle faded away as the two leaders raised their weapons and collided without words, each intent upon only one thing, the other's death. It was a titanic battle. Lothar was a large, powerful man, easily as big and as strong as most orc warriors. But Doomhammer was larger still, and stronger and younger. What Lothar lacked in youth and speed, however, he made up for skill and experience. Both wore heavy plate armor, the battered mail of Stormwind versus the black plate of the Horde, and both carried weapons lesser warriors could never have wielded, the glittering rune-etched blade of Stormwind and the black stone hammer of the Doomhammer line, and both were determined to win, no matter the cost. Lothar struck first. His sword swept in from the side, angling suddenly to weave below Doomhammer's block, and carved a furrow in the Ark's heavy armor. The Horde warchief grunted from the impact and retaliated by bringing his hammer down fast, missing Lothar only because the champion danced back a step. But Doomhammer reversed his grip suddenly and swept the weapon back up, catching Lothar a glancing blow under the chin and sending him stumbling backward. A quick hammer blow followed, but Lothar brought his sword up in time to block it, catching the heavy weapon on its handle. For a second, the two warriors struggled, Doomhammer to bring his hammer down and Lothar to knock it aside, and the weapons quivered but did not move. Then Lothar twisted his blade and succeeded in sending the hammer wide. He stepped in close while Doomhammer was bringing the massive weapon back around and struck the orc in the face with the flat of his blade, stunning the war chief for an instant. But Doomhammer lashed out with his free hand, catching Lothar a ringing blow in the neck and regained his weapon and his composure, while the Alliance commander staggered from that impact. Turalyon was battling orcs of his own, but a powerful hammer blow dropped one opponent, and over the falling warrior he saw Lothar and the massive orc locked in battle. "No," Turalyon shouted, seeing his leader and his hero facing the monstrous black-armored orc. He began striking with renewed force, his hammer crushing orcs with each sweeping blow as he desperately fought his way toward the two commanders. They both stepped in again, hammer and sword swinging. Lothar took Doomhammer's hit full upon his lion head shield, which crumpled from the impact. It nearly drove him to his knees. But the sword caught the orc hard across the chest and dented the heavy breastplate deeply. Doomhammer stepped back, his lips pulling back in a snarl of pain and frustration, and ripped the ruined armor from his torso, just as Lothar rose to his feet again and tossed his useless shield to the side. Then both bellowed and charged again. Doomhammer was faster now without the armor, but Lothar had his sword in both hands and could dance it around the orc's defenses. Both took solid blows, Doomhammer a nasty gash across his stomach, and Lothar a heavy blow to his right side, and both staggered slightly as they parted for the third time. Around them, other orcs and humans fought their own savage battles, as the two powerful leaders struck out again and again, each seeking a weak point in his opponent's defense, each delivering punishing attacks and receiving them in return. The two closed again, and Doomhammer slammed Lothar in the chest with one heavy fist, the impact rocking the champion on his heels and denting his breastplate. Before he could recover fully, Doomhammer stepped back himself and brought his massive hammer down with both hands, all his strength behind the blow. Lothar swung his sword up to block the vicious attack and took the full force of the swing upon his blade, which shattered from the impact. A gasp escaped Turalyon as pieces of the legendary sword fell to the ground, and Doomhammer's blow, now unimpeded, continued its glittering downward arc, striking the top of Lothar's helm with a sickening crunch. The Lion of Azeroth swayed, bringing his ruined sword down reflexively, and laid open Doomhammer's chest with a jagged half-blade before collapsing himself. There was utter silence as both sides stopped fighting and stared at the Alliance commander splayed upon the ground, his body twitching as the life fled him. And then nothing moved, save the pool of blood spreading rapidly from beneath his ruined head. Doomhammer took an unsteady step, one hand rising to press against the gaping wound across his torso. Blood leaked out around his fingers, but still he stood straight, and with an effort raised his hammer high above his head. "I have conquered," he proclaimed in a hoarse whisper, saying and spitting blood but still victorious. "And so shall our foes die, until your world belongs to us."